At the same time, we're seeing investigations now intensifying and accelerating at every level. So we see the Durham investigation, which apparently is a real investigation. I think a lot of people have doubts about how real that investigation was, but it seems it is a real investigation. Now the Epstein.
Sorry, excuse me for interrupting you. But he has as far as I can tell, like a very stable or a sterling reputation. I think he's a Democrat, but he's like goes by the law. Like
this is what I was saying. I mean, you do get people. I mean, I've come across people like this actually. I mean, you will find always. This is one reason, by the way, why courts are unpredictable, because you will find worldly, cynical judges, and then every so often, and very unexpectedly, you will come across one who simply refuses to be pressured, because as far as they're concerned, this is what the law says and this is what they will do. And you can never completely predict how it's going to turn out. And, Durham may be that kind of a person. I know nothing about him. I've never heard of him until this investigation began. But it seems that is a real investigation. And now it seems like the Epstein investigation is also becoming a real investigation.
For a home office, secure your router with a VPN for an encrypted connection, routing communications of your smart devices through a secure private network. If you're working remotely, don't forget to connect to a VPN. NordVPN. Online security starts with a click.
But these things take time, and that's the problem. Whether all of these things will crystallize in time for the election, I don't know. It's going to be very hard. And I've heard from no less a person than Barr, he gave an interview about this on Fox, that the pandemic crisis has slowed the progress of some of these things down, because it's been more difficult to interview witnesses, it's been more difficult to impanel grand juries. The US, by the way, has almost the most complicated and intricate and open to corruption legal system in the Western world, which makes it even more complicated than this. And of course, Tom has been talking about how you have this extraordinary system of two levels of law in the United States. You have a federal law conducted by federal judges. You don't have a proper federal police force. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has some of the elements of a police force, but it is not really a police agency. It's a complicated and strange agency, which also has an intelligence or counterintelligence role. So it is very slow, and it is very difficult to get everything, all the pieces together, working together, and time is short. We have an election in a few months' time. There may be enough time to put all the pieces in place, but the other side, looking at all of these things, they feel the pressure, but what it is doing is that it's making them more frenetic. So at the same time as, the other thing we ought to say, I mean, we have the technology companies, the legal moves against the technology companies, how the technology companies reacting. They're doubling down. They're intensifying their censorships. They're banning more people, even as it becomes increasingly apparent that they're acting in a way that violates the law. So we have this kind of tussle going on, but it's intensifying the political conflict.
No, I agree completely, Alex. You hit the nail on the head. And I as far as like the tech companies are concerned, it's very obvious they're pot committed now. Just use the poker analogy. They're pot committed to removing Trump because they know that if they do, and they can get a Clinton restoration or an Obama restoration, that all their sins will be forgiven. So there's no upside for them to sugarcoat or to soft pedal their tyranny at this point. They're going to act the way they're going to act. Yes. We have to be prepared for it, and we have to stop complaining about it. I'll be honest with you. I'm well beyond complaining about it. Like, what? Like, this is what's happening. So you can either get on the program, get with the program or not. From my perspective, I've been telling people for months, I'm like, look, I don't, this chaos is good for business, guys. Donate to your local charities. There are a lot of people in the United States who are out of work. I don't need your super chats, for example. I don't need any of that stuff. Me personally, I'm in good shape. Other people are not, and that's fine. But the big thing is that you can see this coming. get mentally prepared, get mentally tough, get on, and live with it, and then make alternate plans. And if you're not willing to make alternate plans, then you're leaving yourself out there to be a victim. And now if you're opening yourself up to be a victim so that you can then counter with a class action lawsuit, with material harm or whatever, and you want to go that route, more power to you. Go for it. You, Alex, Stefan Molyneux and Alex Jones and all the rest of them, they want to do that. Great, go do it. But at the same time, don't complain about it. You knew it was coming. You could see it. If you're a political analyst worth your salt, you should have already had this stuff. You should have already had your back end buttoned down. And if you didn't, well, it is what it is. It's your problem. It's your responsibility. It's your business. So,
So what's next with Ghislaine Maxwell? What I'm going to say, I hope she doesn't get suicided. I really hope she doesn't get.
The real question is, who's in charge of her remanding? She got remanded in New Hampshire, not in New York. Yes. So different district, right? Different federal district. Who's in charge of her? My thought here is that what if Ghislaine Maxwell offered herself up here? What if Ghislaine Maxwell, because there's a very strong Israel component to this. What if this is her way of getting protection against being suicided? Okay? Now ask yourself that. Now go down that rabbit hole. I'm not going there, but now open that perspective up. I'm not saying that's what's happening. I'm saying, what if after months of all this, she finally came forward and said, "Yep, this is my best play. Is to put my trust in Barr and Trump and to expose these other people." And because the Israeli government, who she also works for, wants to get their gibs from the Trump administration, and this is their haggle.
Yes.
Okay. So then Trump's weird foreign policy actions start to make more sense.
Yes.
Because again, it's very, very obvious from the moment Trump took office that domestic cleanup, draining the swamp, was more important than cleaning up foreign policy. Yes. He was willing to sacrifice foreign policy to get the domestic cleanup process happening. Right. So if I see a strategic overarching goal from Trump, which is hard to do because he's a mess.
Yeah. Except Tom, his policy towards Israel,
has been steadfast.
It's horrible.
Well, it has been,
in my opinion.
It has been.
Saudi Arabia, horrible.
Of course. From the standpoint of anybody with a conscience, it's horrible. But if you're thinking about this strategically and dispassionately, if you really want to get control of the corruption in the United States, it has to start with a permanent bureaucracy at home. It has to be kneecapping the intelligence communities and breaking up the cabal of people who have been in place to ensure that there has been no change. Look, when we talk about this stuff and we talk about the desperation and the acceleration that we've seen, it's all about tempo with this. It's all about operational tempo from here on out. Okay? That's what this is about. Now, does Trump understand this? I don't know. He was trained by one of the best in the world. He was trained by Roy Cohn, right? But does he have that? I don't know. But I can tell you that he's at least trying. And if he'll make decisions, and because he's an amoral person.
Yes.
Let's not mince words here. Trump's overarching animus is America first, and if that means giving Israel what they want, okay. Yeah. And I read an article last night that says that he's finally lost his patience with Jared Kushner. So does that change things as well? I don't know. It's a good question.
Yes. I'm inclined to agree. I think at the end of the day, he's got so many battles to fight in the United States itself. The very last thing he needs to do is to compromise his position by taking on Israel at the same time. And I think that's it's a straightforward position. I mean, he's got to focus. If he's going to achieve anything as president, he's got to focus on the United States itself. I mean, this is why he was elected. He was elected to make changes in the United States. We'll come to the future of the United States later on in our discussions. But I mean, this is the whole Trump movement, which is greater than Trump, is all about trying to preserve something of the United States, restore it as a kind of political and social entity that works for at least some of the people of the United States, as opposed to a kind of elite that he's no longer really connected to it in any way. So, given how powerful that elite has become over the last 30 years, 40 years, he's got to, as I said, focus single-mindedly on this. And ultimately, what goes on in Palestine is far away. It doesn't affect him in the same way that it would. And if he can, as a result, do deals with Netanyahu that will give him Ghislaine Maxwell, I'm not saying that's happened, by the way, but that's a possibility. If something like that happened, if there was a sort of trade-off, you get the West Bank and I get Ghislaine Maxwell, but having Ghislaine Maxwell advances my agenda in the United States. I don't think Donald Trump, who, as Tom correctly says, is a totally amoral individual, would even think twice about it.
Right. How will the Democrats counter? The more impetus for BLM or Antifa or something new?
They're coming up with something every day, and it's been very difficult to keep up with it. So, I mean, we've had Russiagate, we've had Ukrainegate, which is one of the most absurd things ever that has ever existed. We've had the extraordinary manipulation of the pandemic, and there's a lot to be said about that, by the way, which we can do. And then we've had BLM, which has been the latest evolution of this. And now we've had this bizarre attempt to sort of, reignite the embers of Russiagate with this, Russian bonus to the Taliban story. And they will no doubt come up with something else. I mean, these are, if nothing else, they're very inventive people.
Yes, well, the Russians,
I'll be honest with you guys.
I just going to say, Putin, if you're watching, you're welcome to give me money for me to eat curry. I'm going to do that anyway, but give me money for it.
I'm like, people. I'm going to say this. For weeks now, I'm wondering when we're going to have that. I can't see that Obama, the vandal that he is, doesn't take advantage of July 4th this weekend. I'm just having a hard time with that, believing that he's not going to take advantage of July 4th this weekend. Like it's here. There's going to be people in Washington. There's going to be fireworks. There's going to be all this, right? I mean, come on. This is, I don't know. We'll see. And look, and he just went after Ghislaine Maxwell on the 2nd. Like, you don't think they can't, come up with 250,000 people to march on DC on the 4th or the 5th?
Exactly.
Like, really? Again, operational tempo, and, when you look at what they've done over the course of the last 6-7 weeks, hijacking the George Floyd protests, which were real and honest and all of that, and using that to create opportunities for Trump to overstep and lose the middle class by goading him into using the Insurrection Act. This is why I'm very, very skeptical of the quote unquote, Trump right. Guys like Posobiec and Cernovich. I'll name names here. I don't care. And the rest of them were all calling for Trump to go in with the Insurrection Act 2 weeks ago. I'm like, that's exactly 3 weeks ago. It's exactly the wrong thing to do. Are you kidding me? That'll get you deposed from power. So who do you guys actually work for? Because how dumb do you have to be to know to strategically put that on the table? To me, that's the wrong, that violates federalism. For all of Trump's faults as a president, and he's many faults, and he's made many missteps where he refused to use the power of the presidency that he has at his disposal. The one thing Trump has done that infuriates everybody, and here my libertarian bona fides showing up. Hey, he's governed like a federalist. He said, no, this is not my job. It's your job, Congress. Go pass the law and I'll sign it.
Which puts law.
And that's very libertarian. I mean, and in that respect, the libertarians can all respect that because he's governed like a federalist, and which is a complete opposite of the way Obama governed, and Clinton and Bush and the rest of them. Like, they created an imperial presidency and he's walked away. He's backed off from it.
Yes, and Tom, that puts paid to the lie that Trump is a fascist.
Exactly.
Not at all.
Of course,
he's going by the Constitution and keeping.
Which is why he couldn't.
Federalist.
Yeah.
Which is why he couldn't invoke the Insurrection Act. Someone finally gave him some good advice, right? And the gambit by James Mattis and Esper and the rest of them to make him look weak by saying, "Well, we won't support the troops being used." Like, well, I was never thinking about the troops being used. Thank you very much for telling me that you're all traitors now. I'll add you to this side of the freaking ledger. I mean, that's what he's been. If you honestly look at what's happening here, and I mean, if they have any operational tempo whatsoever, and like I said, Trump is a gangster. Like, he's not keeping a list of friends of Trump and friends of Don and not friends of Don, enemies of Don. Are you kidding me? Like, there's FOD and there's EOD, and the list of EOD is huge, and the list of FOD is very, very short. But there more and more and more of them are outing themselves every day as they get more and more desperate. Because look, John Bolton is guilty of treason. So is Fiona Hill. So is Eric Ciarmella. So is all of these people who are involved in Ukraine Gate. All of these, they're all traitors. Every damn one of them. Pardon my French, or pardon my New York. And like, and you know that I'm worse than that, so I'm doing my best here. Like,
you're very well behaved on my channel.
Yes, I'm very well behaved. I did an hour on True News, and I was really behaved. Or an hour and a half on True News, I was really behaved. So anybody who watches my live streams knows that I swear to the point of being sailor's blush. So, like, you know, I learned from drill sergeants. Okay, so like I say, I'm New York, and this is why New York is not the real world. So when you're looking at this stuff, you're like, okay, he's got these guys on the run in a certain way. He's pushing them to make dumb mistakes, and all I see here are mistakes. Minneapolis was a mistake. The Chaz was a mistake. Atlanta was a mistake. Look at what de Blasio is doing in New York. He's gonna, like, New York City is gonna be closer for Trump than people think it is. It's not that he's gonna win. But the DNC is going to be looking at this, and they're already looking at those numbers now. They've seen 37% approval amongst black people in America for Trump. Do you realize that that's a blowout result? Like that's crazy that his numbers are that high, or maybe it's amongst black men, but it doesn't matter.
Yes.
37% of black men willing to ask a pollster, to answer a pollster with their wife standing over their shoulder, saying, "I'm for Trump." Like you got like I said, the black sheriff in Putnam County, or Clay County, in Clay County, going, I'm going to deputize everybody. Like, yeah, and I'm going to deputize all the legal gun owners, which is everybody in Putnam County.
So if BLM come to my county, I'm going to deputize the legal gun owners in my county, is what he said.
I love that guy. I want to move to Putnam County. I live in Columbia, which is almost as good, but I'm like, I want to move. Can I buy property over there? Like, I almost bought property over there. As a matter of fact.
Let's talk about BLM. If we may, right? Sure. I got something to say, but I want to hear from you.
Why don't you go? We've been dominating.
Why absolutely no, do please.
Okay, so for those of you, so Alex and Tom both know this about me. So my politically very, very left wing, very, very, very left wing, and it all started when I was 18 and PW Botha came to the UK. I went to a school where 55% of the kids were African Caribbean, and then the next rump were from India and Pakistan, and then there were Irish Catholics, and then there were a few English people in my school in London, right? And PW Botha came to the UK in, I can't remember, in the early 80s or something. And I was appalled. I was like, how come in my school we were never taught about apartheid? And why is the government inviting the president of this racist country to the UK? So I got involved in politics, and I got involved with the anti-apartheid movement. And I drifted over from the mainstream anti-apartheid movement to the City of London anti-apartheid movement, the really radical left wing, who got expelled because they had a 24-hour non-stop demonstration, I think for 7 years outside the South African embassy. And I was a regular attender on that. Okay. And a few weeks ago, there was a Black Lives Matter demonstration in the city that I'm in now, which is not London. And my wife is Scottish. She's white Christian Scottish. And my two children, my 12-year-old and my 15-year-old, were going to go. And I read a Facebook post about this demo, that it was going to be a silent demo. They wanted people to keep distance. And they also said, if you're white, don't make a Black Power salute. What? I was appalled. Are you crazy? Are you insane? We're going to have racial segregation rules on an anti-racist demo? I campaigned outside the South African embassy. We never had a rule that if you were white, you could demonstrate this way. If you were Black, you could demonstrate this way. No, we were for something. And that's what's missing with Black Lives Matter. It doesn't address the structural issues. It doesn't address the economic issues, class issues, that white working class, they suffer under this capitalist system the way the Black working class do. There's no vision for unity. I got a quote, I might put it in. Muhammad Ali said, it's wrong to hate people for their color. It doesn't matter who does the hating. Mandela, he had a vision for all people. Martin Luther King had a vision. Even Malcolm X, when he converted to Orthodox Islam, had a vision for all people. And I don't know, Alex, if you heard this, I came across this report that the BLM movement and their supporters wanted to get rid of a statue of Mahatma Gandhi in Leicester.
They did.
No, Leicester.
No, I didn't see that. That's
absolutely. It's absolutely
Leicester
true.
is full of Indians.
We discussed it on the Duran, actually, I think. And I mean, I know absolutely. You're absolutely correct about this. In fact, I mean, I'm going to say this because I'm just old enough. I'm on the tip of the memory of the civil rights movement of the 60s. And of course, I don't remember Malcolm X because he was killed just before, my political awareness grew. But I just remember Martin Luther King. And of course, I remember very well the people who followed. And this is not what they stood for. It is the opposite of what they stood for. This is about creating division. Mm-hmm. It is about emphasizing racial difference, which is, of course, the exact opposite of what people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and all those people were about. Now, Malcolm X, if we're talking about Malcolm X, he was a Muslim, but he had very left-wing views. He was a person who saw things as bringing people together in order to fight a battle against exploitation. Yeah, that was his ideas. Martin Luther King, a much more conservative figure, though he and Malcolm X had some shared views. Martin Luther King, somebody who at some fundamental level believed in what he saw as the promise of the United States. Yeah. He was all about fulfilling the promise of the US Constitution and of the Declaration of Independence and all of those things. He might have been naive, some would say, to think in those terms, but that's what he stood for. And of course, he was absolutely not someone who sought to overthrow the Constitution, who was against the United States as such. Malcolm X, a more radical figure, unquestionably. But both of them, from their completely different perspectives, would have been completely horrified by this thing. They would have seen it as a betrayal of the cause that they stood for. So would Mandela and the anti-apartheid movement, of which, by the way, I was also involved. I was involved in a university for many years after. It was not in any way about setting black people against white people. It was completely the opposite of those things. But of course, if you're talking about the Davos crowd, which is what Tom is talking about, what the Davos crowd wants to do is they want to divide everybody because it's more easy to manipulate them in this way. And if we're talking, can I just say one thing, because Tom said something which is extremely important, because I really do believe this, partly about BLM. I think partly what BLM is all about is that people in the DNC saw that black voters were increasingly, for all sorts of reasons, good and bad, starting to incline towards Trump. So BLM comes along in order to mobilize black voters and consolidate them behind the Democratic Party. And that is, it seems to me, partly what this whole phenomenon is all about.
And this is another problem with these people, is that they have their own solipsism, and frankly, they sniff their own farts enough to believe that, well, we could just manipulate these dumb black people into thinking this. Yes. And that all, and we're going to give them some power. And they think that all they really do have a very patrician view of these people. They've never spent 5 minutes with my neighbors. I remind everybody that I moved into an area in North Florida where I bought family land. I live off of a road named after the old man whose wife just died at 102 from one of his sons. One of his other sons owns 30 acres next to me. I live behind this 40 acres of silviculture. Another one, I mean, it's all that family. And we're the only white people back here, right? And these are not these people are the exact opposite of what the Democrats actually think these people are.
Yes.
And there's no way that they're going to get their vote with this nonsense this fall. If anything, you're going to make them even more willing to embrace the rest of it, the other side of it, because they see Trump not sending in the troops to bust heads. They see the police stand up and go, what do we do? Like, they're angry that the police aren't busting heads more.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've talked to these people. And I'm not just talking about my little corner of rural North Florida. I was recently in Broward County for the Trump flotilla.
Yes.
Okay. And I was there, and dude, this is Broward. that's supposed to be so completely Democrat when it's really not. The supervisor of elections is so corrupt that the numbers come back that way every year. But if you go drive around Broward County and you talk and you look at these people they're not this at all.
No.
And it's a construct created by media. It's by the mind virus that is social media and all the rest of it. And they really do think that, and they think they're fighting the last war. They're like classic generals here. They're fighting the last war. So they're going after, Stefan Molyneux and Richard Spencer and all David Duke. Like, that's all 2016 stuff. Like, those guys don't even matter, right?
Yes.
Like, Cernovich isn't going to matter. When they deplatform Cernovich, it's not going to matter. Like, he's so 2016. Everybody's moved on from those guys, right? They're not what's important. They had their little they had their little document that was published, 6 degrees of Alex Jones document that got published in 2017 or whatever, and they're just running the deplatforming scam. This is how we're gonna, and they've got a what do you call it? They've got a plan, and they're gonna run it, and they're not gonna be dissuaded from it. Again, like I said at the outset, these people have plans. They published them 10 years in advance, and then they put people in place in the various power structures and various political structures and judiciary and here and there and everywhere else to make sure that all those wheels are greased, and that happens regardless of what the people want.
Yep.
And then when the people show up and they do what they don't want them to do, then what happens? And like, here it is, it's July 2nd, and Brexit happens on December 31st, come hell or high water.
We haven't even got to that, right? But let me
so I'm smoothly trying to move out of the United States and move
Thinking
east.
about Black Lives Matter, right? So one of the things that makes it suspicious is how the corporations are supporting it.
Oh, yeah.
Do corporations ever support genuine grassroots movements?
Well, they oppose them. I mean, this is the reality. I mean, a revolutionary movement, which is intended to get Joe Biden elected president, that is backed by the corporations, is not a revolutionary movement. It's a counter-revolutionary movement. It is that it has to be.
Absolutely.
It has to be. And if you actually look at what it says, of course it is. That is exactly what its objectives are. If you put aside some of its sort of agitprop language,
right,
and look at what its actual effect is, it is of course counter-revolutionary, and of course counter-revolutionary in the worst possible sense, because of course the kind of people that ultimately it is going to damage most are exactly the sort of people that you were talking about, Tom, who you are meeting around. They are the kind of people who are trying to live their lives, trying to build their businesses, trying to build their societies, their communities. It targets, ultimately, it demolishes them.
Yep.
And it tries to force them back into political ghettos, which is, again, exactly what Crypto was talking about people demonstrating in different ways, not doing black power salutes, doing all those sorts of things. It pushes them into ghettos. It closes them in those ghettos. It treats them as cannon fodder, electoral cannon fodder, who will always vote for a certain type of party in a certain type of way. And of course, it also a collapse of that of public order in that kind of way is ultimately destructive of the sort of people that you're talking about.
It's not just, and the other thing is that it invites chaos in a way. And remember, I'm a big storytelling. I care very deeply about the art and the stories that we tell and what those and what they mean, right?
Yes.
And watching this play out at a symbolic level. The people the Davos crowd has unleashed this, and they don't realize what they've unleashed.
No,
they think they're going to be able to bottle this back up after November, and then things will go on to where they were. And that's not what's going to happen here. No. We have a moment in time. I just watched The Dark Knight Rises again the other night, and I did a podcast on it on Tuesday, because that movie is actually very prescient. And one of the moments in that movie tells you, like, flat out, it's like Alfred says to Bruce, he says, "Look at Bane. That's the power of belief. They believe something that is beyond them." And worse, and Alistair Crook over at Strategic Culture, a good friend of mine, wrote a great article the other day about the United States losing not being able to regain its civilizational footing. Right, it's going to lose its civilizational war. Why? Because the people the order, the institutional, the cultural order that we're fighting, people like me and you and the rest of us are trying to fight. We're fighting against people who just believe if you tear the old system down, that's a net good. Doesn't matter what you replace it with.
Yeah.
There's no plan for the future. We just know this system's terrible and we want something different. And it's anti-civilizational at its core. It's everything. It's going back 1,500 years. It's going back to pre-Christian times, as little as I understand it. Now, the symbology is terrible. The archetypes are terrible. This is all bad. And unfortunately, the only way out of this is through it.
Yes, and it's not it's the antithesis of what Mandela and Gandhi.
Of course. Gandhi and even Lincoln, in his own terrible way, was fighting for this. If you want to take a generous view of Lincoln, which I don't, but you can even take a generous view of Lincoln that way.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Now, okay. Now let's see, right? Because you did try to move us on, right? Because we're still in the U.S. and we still.
No, we could do this for 6 hours, guys, and we would not wouldn't even get to Russia. So. Yeah. So unfortunately, I have a deadline this afternoon, so we can't do that. But I'm happy to give you as much time as I can.
You said before we started recording how this was playing with the Davos crowd wanted Europe to usurp the role of the US as the dominant liberal globalist power.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So say more about that. What makes you say that? How is that shaping up? And also that the June the 30th deadline passed for Brexit.
Not only Brexit, but also Germany taking over the EU Commission presidency. Right. Both of those things happened on Wednesday. Right. So I think it's very clear that the quote unquote Davos crowd do not want, as Jean-Claude Juncker famously said, there shall be no democratic decisions against the European treaties. That's another way of saying there will be no democracy in Europe.
Absolutely.
We don't have democracy in Europe. What we have is an unelected oligarchy that exists over top. We have transnational superstructure, legal agreements in terms of these transnational trade deals, which Trump is nixed in every way, in order to create a legal overstructure that obviates all national sovereignty. You've got parliaments that meet that have no power. They have no power in their home countries, and they have no power when they go to the European Union and the European Parliament. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the European Commission and the European Central Bank will issue edicts backed up by the European Court of Justice, and whatever they want is what's going to happen.